Yeah, Canada Nickel is a new company. We're actually private right now. We'll be publicly trading in the first half of December. We think this is going to be the most exciting nickel story of 2020, and I'll take some time to walk you through why that's the case. Our main project at this point is the Crawford nickel project, just north of Timmins. It's a large-scale, low-grade nickel project similar to the Dumont project, which my past life at RNC Minerals advanced from a resource stage into a fully permitted, construction-ready project. There's just 4 holes into the structure to date, but it's already identified a multi-hundred meters of nickel mineralization, and the first mineralogy tests that we've done have been favorable and show that it's very comparable again to Dumont. We're fully financed through the first phase of the project. We've raised just over $5 million. We'll be listed with a $12.5 million pro forma market cap, and again in a market where there's very few new nickel sulphide discoveries. And new nickel projects outside of Indonesia. We think this is a project that's going to get a lot of investor attention and a lot of industry attention. Nickel every 15 to 20 years has gone through a super cycle. We went through in the late 60s, the late 80s, the mid 2000s, and we're now, I think, shaping up for, in the 2023 time period. And on the TSX today, there's very few investable opportunities. There's only a handful of nickel companies, laterite and sulphide. So again, I think the timing for us is pretty nice. I'm going to talk about nickel just a bit. In Australia, that's part of the reason I'm here, is people have been more familiar and you've continued to invest in nickel stocks. Literally in Toronto, there's been very few ways to invest in nickel, and so the investor base there has kind of forgotten about most of the nickel fundamentals. Nickel is a very high growth material. That 5% demand growth rate means that the supply of nickel has to double every 14 years. It's been overshadowed by the amount of nickel pig iron that's come out of Indonesia and China, but that is a one-trick pony that's not going to be able to be duplicated again and again and again. And we're headed into a real supply crunch here going forward. Everyone's been focused on the EV story. This is from a Glencore presentation in terms of the amount of nickel that's required. Again, today it's very, very small. It's not a factor in the nickel market at all at this point. But by 2025, you're looking to 400,000 tons of nickel. That's about 8 million cars per year. And by 2030, you're looking upwards of 25 million cars at that point in time. And again, that's sort of in the mid-range of most people's forecasts, as to what metal demand would be required. The thing with the EV story is that when you take that 5% demand growth from all the other uses that we use nickel for, primarily in stainless steel, we're going to need over 1 million tons of nickel just for those trend uses by 2025. When you layer on another 400,000 tons of nickel, that's 1.5 million tons more nickel that we need from 2017 to 2025. To put that into context, that's equal to all of the nickel supply that existed in 2010. So all of Sudbury, all of Norilsk, all of Jinchuan, all of the laterite deposits that existed in Indonesia and China and that were in production at that time, we have to find that same set and have it into production by 2025. When you layer in the next level of growth that's coming in the EV story, we have to do that a second time by 2030. And I can tell you, there are not 124 different nickel companies out there with projects at various stages in the pipeline. There's basically, a few handfuls outside of Indonesia. So, again, Canada Nickel with we think very high quality nickel sulphide opportunities outside of Indonesia are going to be very, 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 very well positioned to take advantage of this growth. One other dimension of nickel, because again, it hasn't had much time in the spotlight to date, is the supply concentration. Robert Friedland did nickel a big favor last February at the BMO conference by calling it the new gasoline in terms of it's really what's required to power the next generation of electric vehicles. OPEC in 1973 controlled 54% of global supply, and we all know what happened during that time frame. And if you think of what companies and countries did to diversify their exposure away from Persian Gulf oil at that time, given that supply fact, nickel in 2020 is going to have the same amount of even more concentration than with OPEC. You've got 3 countries, Indonesia, the Philippines, and New Caledonia, all of which have not hesitated to intervene in their mining sectors. And I don't think they're going to do anything stupid like the Congo and Zambia, but I think the temptation to put a 5 or 10% export duty and add $1 billion of revenue per year will be very, very tempting for these countries going forward. So again, having nickel assets outside these countries should command a premium going forward. Crawford is a Dumont analog. It's instead of sitting in a lot of infrastructure in Quebec, it's sitting in a lot of infrastructure in Ontario. We're just north of Timmins. We're literally underneath a highway, about 20 kilometers north of Timmins, about 10 kilometers north of the Kid Creek mine. All those black lines with the dots are high voltage power lines. You literally have all the infrastructure sitting at the project site itself. This is an area where it's very easy to permit mines. And again, you've got the resource base and people base, to be able to staff any operation quite handily. What we learned at Dumont, and this is what makes this a very exciting discovery, we spent several years understanding, why there was such variation in the recovery of the different minerals at Dumont, which range from anywhere from about 30% to 70%. Through that work, we found out that it's all driven by the serpentinization of the ultramafic rock. The degree to which the rock serpentinizes determines how much high quality nickel minerals are there and the grain size of those minerals. That serpentinization process also creates magnetite. So after 3 or 4 years worth of work and a lot of very careful engineering work that was done, we realized that the mag survey that you fly on day one of a new project, basically, because of that magnetite, basically gives you about 70% of the answer. So that's why I can stand up here today and speak with confidence in terms of what the scale of this discovery at Crawford looks like. On the left there is the Dumont intrusion that's about 6 kilometers long. What we have at Crawford is over 8 kilometers long, and we're looking at optioning other parts of this property that have other multiple intrusions in place. So again, it has the scale. The group that was involved in financing this project initially did 4 holes a year ago, September, that were released in March. You have over 500 meters of mineralization that still ended in mineralization at that point in time. The key thing with this is there's sulfur in the system. There are other deposits that don't have any sulfur. Without those, you can't have sulphide minerals that are more easily recovered. The thing that this project has that Dumont doesn't have is a higher grade starter area. You can see in that first hole, there's over 45 meters at 0.38. Hole number 4, we've got 76 meters at 0.36%. So that's about 25% higher grade than the Dumont grade that you see down there at the bottom of the page. We've already drilled another 9 holes. The assays will be released once we get all the approvals from the TSX with the listing. So that should be coming the next few weeks. And that drill is continuing to turn right now. We've drilled off about 1 kilometer. You can see, we've basically just scratched the surface in the diagram on the left. We've only drilled a small portion of that ore body. But what that means is we've got over 1 kilometer strike length of mineralization. It's over 350 meters wide, and we've drilled to a depth of 400 meters. If you multiply those 3 things together, multiply them by the density of 2.6, that's a 350 million ton cube of mineralization, which at 0.3 is over 1 million tons of contained nickel. Just that cube itself already makes it one of the largest nickel sulphide deposits in the world today. And again, we're just scratching the surface to date. The company will have the main investor group will control about 35 to 40% of the shares outstanding. Will be spun out in a very tight shell of about 50 million shares and with a fairly compact shareholder group. To summarize, Canada Nickel has made one of the most exciting nickel discoveries, I think, of this decade. We're fully financed for our first phase of work. We're delivering a project we think is very well timed for a nickel market that's desperate for new nickel supply, and will be one of the few investable nickel stocks on the TSX, so should get lots of attention. Thanks for your time. We'd be glad to answer any more questions at booth 8 later on. Thank you.